Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts, Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today I'm going to be talking about considerations you need to make when making your first lists or even continuing on into 8th edition based upon kind of the experiences that I've had in reading over the rules and looking into how I think things are going to interact. In the process of doing that, I'm going to be painting up, or continuing to paint, as you see I've started, a Death Watch Dreadnought here. So I've got him painted up here. I've already got the black primed, and then I did the dry brushing that I've done in previous editions with the standard Mechanicus gray and the Fenrisian gray, and then I washed it already, and then I've done up the silver arm for him over on this side already. So I'm just going to continue on with that. So that's what I'm going to be working on project-wise. And talking about 8th edition list building. So, how different is building a list in 8th edition versus 7th edition? Well, mechanically it's a bit different. Mechanically, you need to be able to look into how things work, how things interact a bit differently. We have a lot of different things that are coming up. Like now, when you buy a model, it doesn't come with any standard war gear. So previously in 7th edition, when you would buy a trooper, he would come with his basic war gear, and then you could go from there and upgrade him. But now, points-wise, they come with nothing. Most of the standard stuff, like a bolt gun or a bolt pistol or a las gun, they cost 0 points to add. So it's just a matter of actually just adding it onto the points value. But what it does is it creates a standard level that you're building off of. So if you're buying a las cannon for someone, it's going to be 25 points if it's a Space Marine, no matter if it's for a tank or if it's for an actual person or dude bro. You've got the standard 25 points for a las cannon that you can go with. So it makes things a lot simpler in that manner. You don't have to worry about well, I guess it's also for game balance that in a Space Marine's hand, a las cannon is going to be 25 points worth, and you can figure out later on as you go on whether that's worth it or not, or whether it needs to be adjusted. But when you go with a base standard like that, you at least know what you're working off of. So you don't know if the las cannons on Predators are easier or better, or whether las cannons in a Space Marine's hand are better. Or, it also goes into whether you're trading off, if you're exchanging heavy bolters, or if you're exchanging an autocannon on a Predator for a las cannon, how does that point out to losing the difference of a basic gun, like a bolt gun, in the hands of a Space Marine? So this way, it's pretty standard that if I'm adding on a las cannon, I know how much it's going to be. So you don't have to worry about the exchanges. You don't have to put a value. You just have the value there that everything has, and you just go with it from there, and you put them on. So mechanically, there's going to be differences. You're going to have to keep in mind that you have to add up all the war gear for all the guys that you have going on. This is going to, it's going to take a little bit to get used to, that you don't just, when you put on a trooper, you don't automatically get his gun. You're going to have to add that in there. But it's pretty easy to get used to. I've made a couple lists at this point. It does become easier as you start remembering how much things cost. Like I know a Storm Bolter is 2 points, and so on and so forth as you go on deeper and further into it. But yeah, so that mechanically it's going to be a bit different. But I'm more concerned about strategically, when what kind of units are you going to want to build, what kind of considerations are going to be made when you're making these lists going forward. So in 7th edition, I feel like the best lists were always kind of had a bit of a gimmick that they went with, and they kind of exploited it and they ran with it. So whether it was, Wind Rider spam, or whether it was Drop Pod spam, or whether it was, running off of the formations, going with the Gladius, so it was free transport spam, or whether it was whatever it was, I feel like that was what worked well. So you kind of found something that worked and you went with it and went strong with it. So for instance, my competitive lists at the end of 7th edition were null deploy. That's what they worked with. That's the thing that they really excelled at, was null deploy. It allowed me to control tactically what was going on. I could control a lot of first blood very easily with my ability to, with how I worked with it. It put me in the driver's seat kind of early on. So I had a Skyhammer Annihilation Force, and I had a Ravenwing Strike Force that I would hold in. And the thing was, because of the way those worked, I knew when each was coming in. So I knew Skyhammer would come in turn 1. I knew that Ravenwing Strike Force would come in turn 2. So it was very predictable, which was nice. I could also control the way they came in. I also knew that that the way the game flow was going to work, at the end of turn 2, I had my whole army on the board, but at the beginning of the game, my opponent had nothing to kind of work against. So that was the gimmick that I worked with that, and it was very effective. You know, I had a pretty good win ratio with that. But like I said, it worked on a gimmick. You take out that gimmick, and that list doesn't become nearly as strong as it was because of the gimmick. So now, going into this, where everybody has access to the same detachments, it becomes a bit different. You have to try to figure out how to build the list so that it fills certain roles as opposed to working a certain way. I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be fun, and I think there's going to be no right way to do it. And I think that's going to be the biggest change, is that, you know, back, I feel like in 7th edition, there were better ways to do things. And I guess in the end, you'll probably find some things that work better than others. But in general, I feel like you can kind of go with anything as long as you keep in mind certain considerations. So the first consideration you need to keep in mind is the fact that because of the way that assaulting works, your gun lines now are going to be a little bit exposed if you don't have anything to counter the assault. So, for instance, back in the day, Tau gun lines were pretty strong because you either had to run across the table, or if you were coming in from reserves, you couldn't assault. So you would drop down near them, and then you would have to sit there for a turn getting shot up by this gun wall before they could assault. So it would soften up targets real easy like that and leave you with a situation where the gun line never really was exposed to the assault without having the ability to really shoot them off the table in the first place before they got there, or at least make them a lot softer targets by the time they got there. Now, because of the fact that you can deep strike within 9 inches, or even with the Gene Stealer Cult, you can approach between, more than 9 inches, and then if you roll a 6, you get to move that turn and assault, so you're going to be right in their face. There's a lot of ways to get assault armies into your face in turn 1 without even being able to see them, which is a super strong ability, especially if you've got an assaulty army. Being able to get into the assault is like it was half the battle in 7th edition. Now it's become a lot easier. Yeah, you have Overwatch, and there's some tricks like Tau have the ability to share Overwatch now, but like they used to. But at the same time, that does mean that your units are going to have to face off against assaults, because even overwatching isn't going to be able to take out as many units as just straight up shooting at them. So now the fact that they're going to be getting into your face turn 1 right away means that assaulty armies now are going to be way more effective. And with considering that, you need to plan accordingly with your gun lines. So if you're going to go with a gun line, you need to have some units that can kind of deflect the assault or get in the way of the assault, just make things harder for them. So if you're running Tau, maybe run some Kroot so that your Kroot can get in the way, kind of give a bubble around your gun line, protect them, keep them out for a turn, so that even if they do make the charge on your Kroot that turn 1, then they're going to be sitting there, and the next turn on your turn, you just fall back with the Kroot, and now your gun line can do its job and shoot at all those units that were going to be close and up in your face, and give you a far better chance of surviving whatever charge does eventually come your way, because it's going to come. So if you keep that in mind, you're going to end up in a place where as long as you plan ahead and you've got some protections, your gun line can do what it's always done, which it's always going to do, which is shoot things really well and kill things off the board. But you're not as vulnerable to those early charges as if you hadn't considered it. So back in the day, there was never a reason that you would bring a Kroot to a competitive Tau list. You would just stack it full of heavy suits and then just go to town with the shooting. And if you got caught in close combat, it usually was because you did something wrong. So nowadays, with that in mind, I think the Kroot really serve a good purpose. Like they're expendable they're expendable guys that can kind of take the charge away and make things a little bit more difficult for those assaulty armies to get all up in your face. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. I also think that if you're running an assaulty army, it makes sense to have some pretty good, strong fire base in the back, and that can help support your units as they go forward into the assault. I know in 7th edition that was important, but purely because you were just shooting, and that's what was important about it. Now I think it's important because you're going to end up with situations where it's going to be nice to kind of clear things out a bit, so that when you get up in close combat, they can do their thing, and you're not as vulnerable to the counter maneuvers the next turn. Because if you don't clear out an entire unit, they're going to be able to fall back, and everyone else who can shoot is going to shoot you. And some of the units, like the Tau suits, have fly, which allows them to fall back and shoot you in the same turn. So if you're assaulting Tau armies, suddenly now you can't lock them in combat, you can't keep them in combat. They're going to fall back and they're going to shoot you. You know, they might not be able to assault you, but they didn't want to do that in the first place anyway. So they're just going to shoot you and make you come at them again. Which can be pretty hard to withstand, you know, like you're going to lose models that way. So if you have some shooty forces in there, what you can do is you can have your assaulty forces, the main crux of your power there, go into close combat and start, you know, taking on the enemy. But then have a good strong fire base in the back that can go and shoot a bunch of the other forces that are around there, so that when your opponent does back out, you don't have quite as much shooting at you that turn. You know what I mean? Because your assault units, they can really focus on one. They got the one task. They've got to get in combat and they've got to go into it, and they can do that very well, especially in this new edition. But if they're out there alone without any kind of support, they can get overwhelmed by firepower really quickly. You know, that's just the nature of the situation when you've got shooting and you've got assault. Like, that's a reality that you're going to have to face. So if you can throw in some shooting forces, so if you've got, say, Thunderwolf cavalry, maybe support them with some long fangs with some, you know, las cannons in the back, and they can go and they can take some of the shots, they can take some of the hits, and they can, well, not take the hits, I'm sorry, they could throw down some fire downrange and soften up the targets before you assault into them, and then they can also go and shoot into a bunch of other units that leaves you less vulnerable to the counter shooting after they back out, because they're going to. You know, you can't assume that they're not going to back out, that they're going to want to try to take you in that close combat, because at this point there's no benefit to sticking in combat unless you get charged unless you get charged as an assaulty force. So if your Thunderwolves get charged, odds are you're probably going to want to stay in combat because you're better at that than anything else, and you can't charge once you fall back. So in this case, you're going to want to do that because it's going to allow you to keep fighting into the other phases. But to consider that, again, like I said, those shooting forces can then take out some of those other units that are sitting back waiting for you to be available for shooting again. And the less you've got to worry about, the better you're going to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. So yeah, those are just some considerations for that. Also, with an assault army, it's going to be very tempting to want to just kind of deep strike everything and just let them all just try to make that charge more than 9 inches away. But rolling a 9-inch charge is not always easy, and it's far from guaranteed. So part of me, I would suggest, if you're making an assault army, maybe consider working with only half your army. I know you can only do half your army, but consider half of your assaulty force are the only ones I would consider having in reserve, so that you can take them in real close like that, and then use the other ones to kind of like move across the field, either on foot or in transports. I think Land Raiders are going to be super effective in this because they're going to absorb a lot of shots and be primed to get your units where they need to be to make off assaults. And also be very helpful in absorbing Overwatch when they assault themselves. So I would consider using some of those forces to go across there, because if you've got those guys that deep strike in there, they're going to draw a lot of aggro, as you know, to coin a term from video games. They're going to draw a lot of aggro there, and they're going to draw a lot of fire. They're going to draw a lot of attention, understandably so, because they're up in their face that first turn. And in so doing, they're going to draw the fire. They're going to draw the attention. But by that time, the next turn, suddenly you're up in their face with the other guys from those transports, and now they're ready to make the assault. So you've got 2 waves of assault that can go in there, as opposed to just trying to hope for that first wave to go off flawlessly. What you can do is you can have the second wave ready to go if the first wave either fails or if the first wave isn't able to just finish the job, which is possible, you know, because assault it's not a given, you know what I mean? And at this point, it can get pretty brutal in there. So I would consider having it set up so that you've got basically 2 waves of assaulters that are coming in here. I guess you could also do that where you have, you know, you only bring in half of the forces that you've got in reserve so that the others can deep strike in while the first ones are engaged in combat. But I feel like it's a safer bet, and also you need to get half your army on the table anyway to just set up a second wave to make their way across the table just on the table. So either, like I said, transport vehicles, or I would also consider maybe whatchamacallit, just kind of trudging along, especially if you've got things like bikes or Thunderwolf cavalry. They've got decent speed that they can shoot across the table, and you're not going to be really super exposed, since the rest of your army is also going to be up in their face and drawing attention. It's not like in the previous time when you would just kind of have to hope that as you trudged across withering fire. You've got the ability now to kind of drop units in to draw attention. And again, those shooting units at that point are also going to be good, because they're going to be kind of laying down a cover fire, you know, taking out units. If you've got a bunch of las cannons that are firing on big suits, they're going to do damage, and they're going to need to be taken care of as soon as possible. So they're going to become a priority for your opponent to handle. And if they become a priority to handle, then your assault units are less of a priority and are probably going to suffer. They're going to take less shots at them than if they were just there up in the front by themselves. So again, kind of a mixed force, I think, is going to be the best bet going into this, because also, you know, if you've got a Tau gun line and your opponent comes in with another gun line, you're going to be fine, because they're not going to be getting you insult, and then it just becomes who can fire the best. And oftentimes Tau are the best at being able to do that. I think they're still super strong in this new edition, and Tau gun lines are going to be a super thing. So I would consider, but at the same time, if suddenly you end up drawing a whole bunch of Terminators that are now deep striking right into your face and charging and getting the assault off, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble dealing with that. You're going to have trouble facing that if all you have is your gun line. You know, and if you've got an assaulty army and you end up going up against like a super shooty list, a super gun line list, guess what? You're probably also going to have trouble, because you're going to get shot as you go across. You're going to get shot in the Overwatch. You know, they're going to end up falling back from combat and shooting you. So if you don't have a way to kind of counter that, or at least ameliorate it, or at least take some of the attention away from your units that you need to get into combat there, you're going to have a hard go of it. You know, if you end up just going up against, you know, something super easy, you might do super well. But that's the thing, is like when you're going into tournaments, or you're just going to go with your, you know, you're just showing up at the store with a list, you can't guarantee who you're going to face or what you're going to face, you know? So I think at that point, being super super versatile is going to do you well. I also think that a lot of models are going to be helpful, because things go down relatively quickly in this new edition. I've had some times where it took us a while to get into before you had First Blood, but I've had other ones where, like, first turn, you've got like half the army dead, you know, and it can go real quick. So if you have a lot of models, what you're going to do is you're going to end up able to stay on the board a lot longer. I also would consider really looking into what kind of buffs your characters are going to do for you. I think that the bubbles that you're going to get from those buffs are going to become super important. I think you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be able to work with it. I already had a friend talking about how they want to run, John from Mob Rules actually was telling me how he wants to run his Gilliman with like 15 las cannons around him, because Gilliman allows them to reroll ones, and then he wants to put the Ancient up there so that they can, even if they die, they get one last chance on a 4-up to take out to take another shot. So that's a lot of las cannons doing a lot of las cannon things. You know, and that's a little shooty position that he can have with Gilliman's in there, unable to be targeted because he's not more than nine wounds, and just sitting back behind those guys taking shots. And if you throw a whole bunch of regular Bolter Marines in there too, they can absorb a lot of those wounds, since, you know, now you can allocate wounds, so you don't have to, even if your las cannons are up front, you don't have to take wounds off of them. You can take them off of the guys with the bolt guns. So it's just something to keep in mind, the way things are working now. I would really look into your characters. I think a lot of the work that's gone into this new edition really went into the characters. They've developed some really interesting fluff for them. I think they've developed some interesting rules for them, and I think it's really original and fun what they've done, and I think it's exciting to see what they've done with them. So I would look into them, see what you can put together with them. I've already run a couple things with like my Genestealer cult. I had my Icon Ward, which is super effective in absorbing, because it gives basically everything 6+ Feel No Pain, or what was Feel No Pain, which is pretty interesting. I also had my Patriarch, which let everybody pass their morale test if they were within 6 inches, and also gave special bonuses to my Genestealer, my Pure Strain Genestealers, which was pretty effective as well. So just give yourself, just look over, see what they have, see what you can do with that. I think they're going to be pretty influential, I think, in this next edition. So I think going over that is really going to be beneficial to you too, to kind of work with that. I think they've worked on making characters effective and making characters worth the points that they were, that they're being taken at. So give it a look-see, see what works best for your army. I've already seen a lot of really cool ones. Tau have some really cool ones. Chaos have some cool ones. There's just a lot of synergy, I feel like, that's going on here, and I think that's kind of synergies are what are going to make the difference. Another thing to keep in mind when making a list is command points. You know, I think that the way they've worked it out now, the more restrictive the list is, that the Force Org is, the more command points that you're going to get. You know, so you have a patrol, which has very few restrictions on what it is. It's very small requirements. You get, I think it's 1 command point from that. Whereas if you take a battalion, which is the next one up, it's like 3. And if you take, I can't remember, platoon? No. Shoot. I can't remember what the third one is. If you take that one, you're looking at getting an additional 9 command points. And right now, there's only a few things that you can use with. I'm sure there's going to be more, especially once the codexes start coming out. But I think that that alone is going to be a pretty big determinant factor in what people do strategically with their forces. So just coming up with the organization for your list is going to become a technical list, a tough decision, and a practical decision when trying to figure out what it is that you're going to be doing. Because command points can be super, super effective. When you roll, when you have the ability to re-roll dice, you're going to be in a strong position to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. I've had games where I got to re-roll psychic powers, I've re-rolled charge distances, I've re-rolled shooting, I've re-rolled damage. All of these things are possible, you know what I mean? You don't have to use them, you can only use them once per phase. But you can, you can use them once per phase, and you get to go in there and you make the decision of what it is that you want to get the reroll, what's important to you. So I had it where I was using Smite, and I got it, the power went off. It was going to do D3, but I had rolled a 6. And I was like, if I can get this to a 10+, it becomes D6 mortal wounds instead of just D3. So I decided to use I decided to use a command point to re-roll that other die to see if I could possibly get it up to a 10, because I thought that would be just super destructive. I thought it would be well worth the try, and sure enough, I did. I ended up Perozine, but it still went off. I ended up taking some wounds, but I got it off, and that's the important thing, is that I was able to turn the situation to my benefit with those command points. And I think the more rerolls you have, the better able you are to respond to situations when the dice don't do what you need them to do. You know, and that's I think in this new edition, that's going to become more and more important to how the game goes. You know, I think in 7th edition there was a little bit of you know, if you showed up with a certain list and you kind of paired off, you could tell who was going to have an easier time winning than the other. I think now, with the way things are, every list is going to have a chance. And it's going to come down to how you tactically maneuver them, and it's also going to come down to how you how the dice perform for you. So if you have more of an ability to re-roll those dice, you're going to have more of an ability to take that question mark out of how you do. You know, and I think that's going to become very effective, and I think that's going to become a big part of contention. It's going to become a big part of the tactics going into this new edition. Determining when and how many command points that you're going to use throughout the game, so that you're not left completely wanting for them later on, but at the same time you're able to get the dice to do what it is that you want them to do. So coming up with lists, maybe it's worth it trying to throw in a couple extra troop choices. You know, maybe you throw in a couple extra scouts if you're Space Marines, because throw some sniper scouts. You know, they can get a little bit expensive. They cost, I think, more than tactical Marines at this point. Once you give them their camo cloaks and sniper rifles, but they can be helpful in picking off characters, because they're allowed to target characters out there who are the ones who are going to be giving the buffs to your enemy. So if you can take out their ability to buff their forces, suddenly they become less effective. So if you can manage to use those scouts to take out Gilliman, my friend's list there with with all those las cannons is still dangerous, but not quite as dangerous as with using that kind of concept that he had for it. So you get to control. Again, it comes down to just being able to control the way the game goes, controlling the flow of the game, and controlling what kind of powers people are able to execute. Yeah, I think those are kind of considerations you need to make. I think you also need to consider looking into vehicles and monsters, because they're brutes. They are really powerful, and I think they're going to be the ones that are going to last out the longest out on the battlefield. It takes a lot to take down vehicles. It takes a lot to take down monstrous creatures, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be out there. And even though they start to lose strength or lose whatever it is, varying for the different forces as they go on, I think that they're still going to be. I think they're still strong, and they're still something you need to consider, no matter what. So with that in mind, you can use them as distractions. You can use them to get things where they need to be. You can also use them as mobile gun platforms. You know, throw them up there. Why not? Like a Predator is going to be strong. It's going to be powerful going up front there. So yeah, you can just use it. And I think the tanks, I think the vehicles are going to become a very important part of people's lists, a very important part of how 8th edition goes. And they're just cool. You know, they're just cool. Everyone's tanks in the different armies are cool. The different giant monsters are cool. So Tyranids, giant monsters are cool. And, you know, if you don't have to worry about your tank blowing up turn 1 to a lucky las cannon shot, you know, their points become more worth it at that point. They're going to be around longer. They're going to get to be able to do what you want them to do. So have a reason for taking them. Have a reason for having them in your list, and have a goal that you want them to do. And odds are they're going to be able to do it now, because they're going to be around. They're not going to get popped. There's no more explodes results, so you're not going to get popped the first turn. And they'll be able to go out and kind of execute the tactic that you want them to do. So set up a gun line with your predators, and they'll be able to shoot up there and get the shots off before they die, because it's going to take a lot to take them down before they get to shoot. Whereas previously, a couple lucky las cannon shots, and I never got to use suddenly my predators didn't even get to do anything in the entire game. It's going to be very hard to take down a monstrous creature or a big strong tank turn 1 now without suffering any kind of consequence. So yeah, I think they're going to be powerful. I think you need to look into them so that you can utilize their staying power and the kind of and the kind of strength that they represent on the battlefield for you. What else do I think that you need to consider while you're doing all of these things? Right now, I think flyers are going to be pretty powerful. You know, I think that the ability for them to stick around and the ability for them to not suffer, to be harder to hit. It's not quite 6s to hit anymore, but it is. It's still -1 to hit a supersonic flyer. Which, when you're dealing with heavy weapons at that point, if they've moved, they're already at a -2. You know what I mean? So they're looking at, you know, Space Marines at that point are hitting on 5s, and most anything else is hitting on 6s if they've moved a heavy weapon and they've got and they're shooting at a flyer. So they're going to be sticking around a lot longer, and they've got some really strong abilities like the Dark Talon for the Raven Wing. Its gun is really brutal, you know. There's also a lot of they've changed the way that bombs work, so I think they're going to be pretty strong and pretty powerful. And I think that I just think that they're going to be really good at doing what they need to do, flying around and whatnots. And they can't be charged by anything that doesn't have fly, which is another thing I think you should consider is taking some units that are relatively decent in close combat and using them to kind of harass flyers. You know what I mean? I think assault Marines in the Marines code, the Marines are going to be very cool at that. I think it's going to be fun jumping up on top of the wings of an enemy flyer and trying to bring them down. I think that because at that point those flyers, I guess they can still fly. They can still shoot because they're flyers, because they can fall back and shoot. Because they're going to always have to keep moving. But yeah, I think it's just an interesting mechanic there, being able to assault up with some of those, because they're not going to be expecting that. You know what I mean? They're probably not going to be expecting that. They can fire Overwatch now. Everything can fire Overwatch. So vehicles can fire Overwatches is pretty brutal. But at the same time, they're not going to expect you to be assaulting their airplane anymore. But you can, just with certain troops. Another thing to keep in mind is going to be the ability of fast units, not like keyword fast, but just units that are fast, getting in the face of enemy forces and just distracting them. For instance, the Helldrake is actually pretty decent in close combat, but the thing that it has the best is that it's really fast. It can move 30 inches, and it can assault, because it's just dropping down and it's assaulting. It's got that ability to do so. And I think that's going to be pretty awesome, because you can use those to get in the face of your enemy's shooting units or his enemy's effective units, and kind of hold them there. Because if they're especially if they're shooting units, most of them are not going to be able to shoot next turn, because they're going to have to fall back from you, and then they're stuck out there. They're not able to shoot because they've just fallen back, unless they've got special rules that allow them to. But you can figure that out as you're playing along. I think that it's going to be kind of interesting to see stuff like that. So I think Helldrakes are going to be great for that. Just running up there, engaging units in close combat and locking them in, so that the next turn they've got to make a choice. It's like, do I try to stay here and try to fight you, or do I try to back up and see what happens? You know, because if they back up, they're basically forfeiting everything else that turn, which is pretty brutal, you know. What else? Oh, I think you really should look into any kind of former flame template. So anything with a flamer. So heavy flamers, especially heavy flamers, and anything like a strong, anything that's strong and used to be a flaming template. So frag cannons, for instance, are going to be super strong. I think that D-size are going to be super strong, because for a couple reasons. One, they're going to be, I mean, they're just strong in general. The fact that you don't have to roll to hit is pretty amazing. I think it's also pretty effective. And on top of that, they don't suffer the penalty for shooting at flyers, because they don't roll to hit. So you don't have to take a -1 to no roll. You know what I mean? And also during Overwatch, they don't roll to hit. So hitting on 6s is no longer a thing, because they don't roll to hit. They just automatically hit with all their shots. So I've heard stories of frag cannons just obliterating units as they came in to assault them. And I think that would be a lot of fun. Just suddenly, you know, that your opponent thinks they're assaulting in, and suddenly you're like, well, now I'm going to shoot my flamer, and he's got D6 shots that don't have to hit. Oh, I got you with all 6 shots. Cool. And you can just really, really loosen up, really soften up a unit as it's charging into you with those kind of weapons. So look into the former template weapons, look into the frag cannons, look into the heavy flamers, look into the D size, because the fact that they don't roll to hit really avoids a lot of the pitfalls that other firing has to. So like heavy flamer is heavy, but it doesn't have to roll to hit. So if you move with it, you still get the same number of shots. It doesn't say -1 to the shots if you move. It's -1 to the hit rolls, and you don't have to worry about that. You're just going in there and you're just getting that number of hits. So if you get charged, they're actually super good at being defensive for gun lines. You know, if you've got your Eldar and you decide to set up a strong gun line with, you know, with Wind Riders with scatter lasers, because scatter lasers are heavy, so you'd be suffering -1 if you move them. You can use D-size to kind of get in the way of Assaulter, so that if the unit assaults you, boom, you just D-size them to death. It's like, I think it's like strength 10 shots now, which are auto hits. Oh, it's brutal. I think it's going to be super effective kind of strategy that you can play with that there. So I would definitely look into that. I think it's going to be strong. I think it's going to be brutal, and I think it's going to be fun to just kind of see how that goes. What else? Those are kind of a lot of the main things to keep in mind. I think right now, honestly, any unit is going to be. I think every unit is going to be able to be used in the game without it just being because you think they're cool. You know, I think every unit's going to be able to do something strong. I think every unit is going to be able to. I think every unit is going to have its strengths and weaknesses, but I don't think any unit's going to be a complete write-off anymore, which is awesome. You know what I mean? Because that means that you get to make it an army that you want to play, and you get to do it in a way that makes you happy. You know, I think that's what's going to be most important is running the units that you find exhilarating to run, the things that excite you about the game, the things that are exciting to play with and against. So, you know, I don't think there's any insta-win strategies anymore. I don't think it's going to be as easy as looking up a list online, because I think all of the best lists going into 8th edition are going to be very much dependent upon your ability to utilize them in an effective manner. I think it's going to be very important to utilize them in a way that's best on the table, on the battlefield. I think games are going to come down to your ability to play and not your ability to find lists online. And I think that's an important distinction. I don't think it's not a dig at anybody. It's not a dig at anything. But I think the game is now going to be won by those who are the most effective. Those of you who are the most effective generals on the table are going to be the ones who are going to find the most success in the game. So, not the ones who bought the best list, not the ones who did that. You know, if you were going to go up, if you're going to finish up at the top of like a big GT, then yeah, you were probably a good player anyway. But now, I think more than ever, it's going to come down to who the best general was, and not necessarily what army they brought. You know, I think I don't think any army is going to have any easier time than any on the table. I think everyone's got their strengths, and you have to learn how to maximize those strengths and utilize them in ways that maximize those strengths. You know what I mean? I think you're gonna have to. I think it's going to take a lot of trial and error, figuring out what works best for your army, and you'll probably be able to have help, you know, on the way when people talk about how good units are. But even now, I've seen a lot of different opinions on how units perform, and opinions that differ from my experience with units. I've had people say, you know, certain units that I've played that I thought were really effective are not effective, and that's, you know, that's their opinion. But I think it's an important aspect that you have to understand that at this point they're just opinions, and I think you're going to see that more and more often, that it's going to be opinions and not statement of facts. You know, back in the day, back in 7th edition, talking about what, a week, back in 7th edition, you know, there were certain units that were just not effective. that were just not good on the battlefield, and that was you know, that's not great. And if you saw them in a tournament and you saw them across the table, you kind of knew what to expect. Now I think everything being able to be fielded effectively means that you're going to see a lot more variety in lists, and it's going to come down to just utilizing what you bring to make the biggest impact. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to make it games more interesting. I think it's going to make games, you know, more. It's going to take a higher level of skill to pull off a victory nowadays, I think, than what it used to be. You kind of had to have luck a lot more. So, and I think luck's obviously always going to be a part of this game. Anytime that you're dealing with, you know, anytime that you're dealing with rolling dice, you're going to end up with situations where you have where it's going to take a lot of luck in order to, you know, in order to do well. But at the same time, I think now there's going to be a lot more skill determining things than just list preparation. You know, back in the day, you know, back in the day, I keep saying back in the day, in 7th edition, if you could come up with a list that worked well, you know, you could win, and that's what it took. Is coming up with a strong list that that synergized well. Now I think you still have to come up with a strong list that synergizes well, but you have to be able to utilize that and follow its strengths and weaknesses a lot more closely than I think you used to have to. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all turns out. But I think you can go into it just kind of. I think the best way to form a list at this point is to come up with a strategy that you want to do, and then look at your army, the forces that you have, and figure out which ones are going to be best able to execute those strategies. You know, so if you want to have a very assaulty army, take a look at the ones that are going to be good at assault, the ones that can have ways of getting into assault faster and easier. You know, maybe there's something that you can't fire Overwatch against. You know what I mean, or something that gives a bubble that you can't fire Overwatch against. Maybe there's something that allows them to deep strike a little bit closer than 9 inches. I saw some that can go a little bit closer. Like there's the deep strike beacon from the Death Watch allows you to kind of jump into different places. You know, I think those are going to be very effective. I think those are going to be very strong. I think, you know, if you want to sit back and you want to do a lot of like strong shooting, check out which units are going to be best at it, and then try to figure out a strategy to keep them alive so they can keep shooting for longer, because that's going to determine how well your list does. If you can actually shoot for longer, you're probably going to perform better if you've got a shooty list, which makes sense, you know, because the longer your shooty units are alive, the longer they're on the board, the more shots that they're putting into the enemy, the more likely you are to come out on top. So it's just going to come on to finding the right strategy and finding out how to execute it the best and how to keep things going in an effective direction, and working out how each unit can help support the other one. I think that you're going to see a lot more, like I said, a lot more lists that are based on providing the most number of command points and still being effective in doing in performing a task. You know what I mean? And performing something, because I think with the advent of Maelstrom, the way it is, you're gonna have situations now where they're gonna have to respond. You're gonna have to move. You can't just sit back. And doing so, you're going to need to be able to protect any units that you do have sitting back and shooting. So all of these things are coming together. I think the assault phase got stronger. I think that the shooting phase honestly didn't lose much of its luster. I think you've just seen a more balancing, and I think you're seeing a lot more balancing with a lot of the armies in and of themselves as well. So I would just go out there, figure out a game, a form of play that you enjoy. If you love assaults, look into assaulting. You know, if you love shooting, look into shooting, and just kind of go with those, and follow them through, and find a way to make them work with your armies. But keep in mind all of those things I talked about. Keep in mind the fact that flamers are going to be very powerful. Keep in mind that assaults are going to get in your face a lot quicker than they used to in 7th edition. Keep in mind that you're going to need to be relatively mobile to avoid your opponent's flanking maneuvers, and also to avoid and also to make sure you can jump onto objectives, which is still a bit of a holdover since 7th. That's just not gone in this edition, so you can't just kind of go back to the static gun line anymore. I think you're going to need to be able to shoot things. So even if you have a strongly dedicated assault force, you're gonna want to have some kind of strong shooting abilities to hold back the enemy and protect them, protect your forces kind of as they go forward into battle. I think that's all going to be very important things to keep in mind as you go forward with this. So I hope you guys have found that interesting, have found that helpful. I know those are just kind of some of the ideas that I've found as I'm building up my armies as I'm going. At this point, I'm still in the experimenting phase. I'm still trying to see what different forces do and see how much what they're capable of doing, and see what they're capable of doing against other forces. So the more armies, I'm trying to see as many different types of armies as possible, so that I can try to get you know, so that I can try to fight off against them and see what their strengths are and see what my weaknesses against them are, and then try to come up with solutions for that. You know, I've seen my bikes are not quite as survivable as they were, so that means that I've got to find a way to compensate for that. Find a way. Maybe I bring a lot more strong shooting so that they're not just focusing on my bikes, you know, or maybe I bring in some other assaults like Terminators or something so that there's something a bit more angry in their face closer up. Either which way, you know, you just got to find ways to make what you do work. And you need to keep in mind that your opponent's going to be doing the same thing. And keep in mind that when you compose your list, it needs to be composed with consideration for all the different phases. Because even now, if you come up against a strong psychic army and they're throwing off smites like left and right, if you don't have any psychers to try to deny any of those, it's gonna be painful. You know what I mean? It's gonna be painful. And you know, because now psychers are the only ones that can deny. You know, you can't just deny straight up with everything else. It's got to be a psyker that denies it. So I think what you've got to do is you got to keep that in mind as well when you're going forward, whether or not you have the ability to respond to a psyker heavy list. You know, these are just things that you've got to keep in mind. So I think it's all important things in figuring out what works for you and what works for your army, because I think more so now than ever, there's not going to be any go-to thing to do. I think there's going to be more of a range of options that each army is going to have in confronting opponents, and I think that that's going to be important to keep in mind, not just for how you make your list, but how you're going to respond to other people's lists. Because, you know, there were times when you would go up, if the meta was strongly Marine, you knew that if you brought a bunch of Grav, that it was going to be very effective against that power armor, or even that Artificer armor. Nowadays, you have to consider all of these different effects and consider the fact that, you know, everybody's effective, so everyone can do something. And if you get blobbed with a whole bunch of boys, you know, the same tactics that you would use against a highly elite army aren't going to work. So you're going to need to be able to have all-comers lists are going to be way more effective nowadays, I think, than were in 7th edition. I think all-comers lists weren't super effective. I think they suffered from the fact that they were like jacks of all trades. They were you know, they were good at everything but masters of nothing, and it left them kind of vulnerable. Whereas if you kind of focused heavily on one gimmick, that was very effective in 7th edition. But nowadays, in 8th edition, I don't think that's as effective a form of planning as it used to be. You know, I think there's still going to be ways that you can use gimmick. Like I said, you know, you're going to see a lot of Gilliman bombs that he's giving off his bonus. I think you're going to see a lot of different character buffs. I think characters are going to be pretty strong and important. But then to counter it, you're going to see a lot of sniper stuff. You know, you're going to see Vindicators, you're going to see Ratlings, you're going to see Sniper Scouts. You know, you're going to see the Sniper Drones. You're going to see these units that are effective at targeting important buff-giving units. You know, or deep striking into positions where you can just focus on the target on the characters is going to become important. And I think that. With that in mind, you've just got to look at how your army is going to perform, and then kind of see if it's able to handle different armies coming at it. You know what I mean? So if you've got a strong gun line, is your army going to be able to handle getting assaulted turn 1? If not, then maybe you need to change your list so that it can handle that kind of tactic, that kind of danger. You know? So yeah, just keep it open. I think the more agile your lists are, the ability to respond to different things, I think the better they're going to be. I think the more able they are to face a wide variety of situations, the better they're going to perform on the table. And at the end, though, you need to make sure that you're bringing things that you enjoy playing, because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to. Because if you enjoy playing it, you're going to learn how to play them best. And the better you play them, the better you're going to perform. So, yeah, those are just some of my ideas. I think there's things to keep in mind there, and I think there's ways, and I think it's always going to be, I think it's going to keep evolving. This is very early on. This is just from my limited experience so far with 8th edition. This is from reading the books, reading the rules, and playing a couple games and getting a couple battle reports. And watching a couple battle reports too, just seeing what people are doing and seeing how things are doing. So yeah, I hope this was informational for you guys. I hope it was interesting. I got a fair amount of paint work done on my guys. They're pretty good. I'm pretty happy how they're turning out. I'm gonna get finished putting down these base coats and then throw down another wash of Nuln Oil to dun it down. And I think it's gonna be good. And then I got to figure out what to do with my base. I've got to figure out how to attach him while still putting down all of that, my usual cracked earth that I've got with my, well, like these guys here. So, figuring out the cracked earth for these guys. Yeah, I hope it was enjoyable for you guys. I'm excited. I really am. I'm having more fun building lists in 8th edition than I've had building in a long time. And I think just getting used to adding on the war gear is going to take a little bit to get used to, but I don't really think it's going to be a hard thing to get used to. So, I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. I have been Phil the Glacial Geek as always. And until next time, have fun.